Welcome everyone to my review of the Canon 50 1.4 SSC FD lens. This is a lens that I picked up for not even more than $20, and I want to get into today how it compares against a newer lens like this Thypoch 50 1.4 Simera for like an M mount. I'm adapting this on my Nikon Z6III that's currently recording me right now, and all the comparisons shot will be out of this camera here, shot in NRAW for video and then obviously raw photos. As you can see now, I have this Canon FD in my hand and I'm shooting from the Thypoch 50 1.4 now. Looking at both the images in the camera, it's actually pretty surprising for $20 what the Canon FD is able to do in comparison.
These FD lenses were first developed in the early 70s and they featured the SSC Super Spectre multi-coating. They were developed in Japan, and after checking the serial number on this model, it appears to have been made in October of 1979. Although Canon was killing it at the time, they also had many other major competitors with companies like Nikon with their AI and AIS Nikkor models. You had Minolta with their MC Rokkor models in the 1.4 line. You also had Pentax with their SMC tachomer lenses, which are highly regarded even today. And of course, the famous Leica Summicron and Summilux line. Going into the focusing on this lens, it focuses really nice and smoothly, although I do recommend using 2 fingers unless you're locked down on something like a tripod. Going into the aperture now on this lens, I find that it is really nice and clicky, although you could potentially have it declicked if you brought it to someone who does lens repairs. Showing now the focus breathing on this Canon FD lens, you can see that it has a really long focus throw, going from infinity down to its minimum focus range of 0.45 meters. Although there's not too much breathing, but the focus throw length is really long and you're going to have to do quite a bit of spinning, and hand holding it might not be an ideal way of using this lens. Going on now to the Thypoch 50 1.4, this is a lens that certainly is not built for video, so I didn't have high expectations for this, and from the times that I've tried to do focus pulls with this lens, I realized right away that this is built rather for photography purposes, so keep that in mind. All right, now let's just have one final look at its minimum focus distance right here of 0.45 meters. We're gonna go to infinity and a little bit beyond that. My apologies. Yeah, there we go, a little out of focus. And back we return to its minimum focus. Don't worry, photo comparisons are coming up right away.
In the 70s, this minimum focus distance of 0.45 meters was actually pretty respectable compared to, say, a modern RF 50 1.4 USM going to 0.40 meters. There's really not that much of a difference, so it was a really well-regarded lens at the time. In this last test, I'm going to compare against the 50 1.8 EF lens. This is the newest version that they had released, still with the metal backing on it. And I'm really curious how well this FD does in comparison to this one. We're going to compare at f 1.8. Obviously, that's the only fair aperture to start at, considering this is 1.8. But let's see exactly the difference between the two. The FD has no autofocusing in it like this EF lens. So for a lot of people, that might be better value for you to go and purchase this 1.8 EF lens instead. Okay, now moving on to the 1.8 EF lens. I realize I framed this shot horribly. I really should be crouching to do the shot. Anyways, just wondering how this looks in comparison. As I mentioned before, I paid only around $20 for my FD lens, so I'm not sure anyone's going to find a better deal than that. However, on the used market, it should be found around like $100 or so, a similar price that you would find this 1.8 for, and you get autofocus as well. So maybe this one will work better for you guys. Well, I think we've done some pretty good comparisons here today. Let's go back into the studio and we will compare how these lenses stack up against one another. All right, let's go.
This Canon FD lens really surprised me when I first brought the images into Lightroom. Looking at a few right now, you can just see that for a lens at this age, it really has pretty nice detail. There is a little chromatic aberration, which can typically be fixed in post-processing, and it's really quite easy, but I've been really happy with the look of the images that this lens has produced. Looking at a shot at 1.4, has nice bokeh, kind of soap bubbly, very rounded edges on it. This is, I believe, 2.8. I'm going to raise the brightness a little bit there, but the detail in this log here looks pretty decent. Let's look at now an image at f8, and the bokeh up close looks really nice and smooth. And the amount of detail that this shot provides is really quite nice, in my opinion. Let's just do a little bit of a zoom in. I don't know, why are you not zooming in? Yeah, see. So if looking right here, you can see some chromatic aberration. So you're going to want to just remove that from your image. If it doesn't go out immediately, you can use the fringe, and it looks like we're going to have to reduce some of this green in the image here by changing that adjustment, and there you go. It's all gone. Although I do see some more chromatic aberration, but that's the fun of shooting with these old vintage lenses. There you go. See? Gone. It's just playing with the defringe slider, and you'll usually be able to fix this. Going into any sort of profile adjustments, we're going to go over to this photo here, and let's just observe exactly how much of a difference some of these profile corrections add to your image. Let's go to here, and they do have some for the Canon 1.5 FD lens. So this is with it on, and this is with it off. So I think it does help quite a bit. I should mention as well, all these photos are shot on the Nikon Z6III, which is a 24 megapixel sensor. Yeah, look at the sharpness in this image. For being a 50, it's really quite great. There's really nothing to complain at all about this. And the colors look nice. They're decently saturated. I do often typically lower my saturation in images. I don't like it to be that saturated, and I usually add more vibrance to the image than anything. Okay, now let's look at this next image here. The greens look nice and lively. I believe this was shot around f8, but look at the sharpness. In the corners, for an old lens like this that was produced around 1975, it's really nice to look at. Let's look at some more detail here in this image. Colors are nice. Corners are really detailed.
Okay, let's go on to this image here. Let's turn on some profile corrections to see how much of a difference that makes. When turning that on, 51.4, look at that. It has a pretty modern look to it. You'll see in a little bit. I'm going to compare it with this Thypoch, and I think this lens looks incredible in comparison to the Thypoch. Now look at this image here. I did notice in my editing that there was some chromatic aberration that I found here in the sparkly contrasty portion of the scene, but we'll be able to remove that, I'm sure, pretty easily. I don't think I see much of it anymore. I think it's mostly gone now. And yeah, overall the background bokeh is really nice and smooth. You have a little bit of like so bubbly rounded bokeh, but it looks modern. Look at this sunstar too. Overall, I'm a pretty big fan of this lens and how it shoots. Just look how smooth this background is. There's no real like hard lines in the bokeh. It's just so smooth compared to a lot of other 50 1.4s that are released even today. It has a really nice look to it. Let's just see here. This, I believe, was shot on 51 point, or sorry, I don't need to tell you 50. It's shot at 1.4. But look at the detail for an old vintage lens like this. It's crazy how much detail you get out of it. And this is on a 24 megapixel sensor. Here's another shot here. In the sun, it has more of like a dreamy sort of look to it. It's a little bit faded, which I think works really great for video. I really do like its characteristics when shooting video. So here you go. You can see a little bit more. Oh, I thought I could. Yeah, I think there's some chromatic aberration in that. But this is what a lot of people want actually when purchasing a vintage lens. It has a bit of character that you don't otherwise get from a lot of modern glass. Going over to this image here, you can see it does a really good job as well, shooting black and white, something that not every lens excels in, but it seems like it does a really good job in that aspect. And look at the detail here. I believe this was shot at f8, but look at that. Look at the corners on this lens. This was shot at ISO 1600. Oh wait, no. Okay, yeah, it says f16, but that's just because I was using an adapter and it just automatically sets it as that. But I believe this was like around 5.6 f8. But look at that. Oh, I'm really impressed with how that looks. The little bit of grain too adds a really nice look to the image. This is now at 1.4. It's nice and detailed, but it's not overly sharp. Shot a photo at nighttime on a ride here, and you can just see the amount of vignetting that this image has. Let's just see if we can clean that up now with the Lightroom fixes. And now you're going to want to raise the vignetting probably all the way. You see, even then it's still not going to quite clear out all of the vignetting, even at the 200 setting. One thing you could do is use AI to clean up some of the corners. Like if you were to go here and then do a generative fill in this portion, just to clean up these corners, because it's really not a hard thing to do. AI is pretty good now, and I think you can get a little bit of a pass just by clearing up the corners with AI. Police aren't going to come after you for that.
Let's just see now how that did. It's better, but yeah, maybe we'll take a few passes to get it right. But look at this. This is, I did a 0.5 second shot on this one, handheld, no tripod. So yeah, maybe it could have been a little sharper if I didn't try and handhold this one. Here's some shots at night with super high ISO, but helped create a bit of a vintage look here. Colors look nice. I really like this photo. Some of the halation that you get with this lens without any sort of filter looks nice. Although, actually, no, I did have a Blackmagic, sorry, a ProMist filter on this one. Here's now some shots on the ferry. And I just like the vintage look and the colors that are produced from this lens. Here's some portraits here. I'm really in love with these images. I think it's a really great portrait lens. Go to some of the other shots of the ferry here. Colors look nice. This was shot on it as well. Okay, now going into the comparison with this Thypoch and the FD lens. So we're going to do some side-by-sides of these two to compare them. Moving on to the comparison between the Canon FD on the left and the Thypoch on the right. Both images have a good amount of character, with the bokeh being a little interesting looking on this Thypoch. I think the FD maybe has a little bit nicer and smoother bokeh on this shot. Let's go on to the next photo here. On to the next image now. We're at 2.8 on both lenses. Bokeh looks quite a bit closer at 2.8 rather than 1.4 with the last comparison. The images look surprisingly similar in a sense. I think the Thypoch has maybe a little more 3D pop though. It looks like it really pops out of the image, although both lenses do have quite a bit of like 3D sort of character to them. Let's go on to the next image now. On to 5.6 now, comparing the two. And this is where it gets pretty similar, with the FD having a bit more of a vintage rendering, especially in the colors. The Thypoch has that Leica glow to it, which is really nice and aesthetically pleasing. The bokeh in the background of both of the images is really nice and smooth. Comparing now both images at f8, both look really nice and highly detailed, nice and sharp. The Thypoch on the right-hand side looks a little bit sharper, but a lot of the haze that was in the image before with this FD on the left has now been fully cleaned up. Now let's look at f11. Both these lenses look really nice and detailed. Overall, really good performance for the FD. When looking at distortion performance on the FD, certainly could use the help of some profile corrections, mostly in the form of the vignetting. Even at 200, it's still pretty dark in the corners, but it seems like the distortion control does a good job, although I don't find this lens to have that much distortion. It's a 50 after all. And this is at 1.4, and now let's just look at some of the other ranges without profile corrections. 2.8, 5.6, f8 now, and at f8 with profile corrections. And let's compare now how that looks compared to the Thypoch with no profile corrections turned on. So we have the Thypoch again on the right side, and the left we have the Canon FD. That's really sharp at f8 on this FD lens. It does a really good job. The colors aren't as accurate as you can see here, but pleasantly surprised with how this looks. Now, all right, so now both lenses are shot at 1.4, and you can just see the difference in rendering of this background blur. I think both are great. This FD has a bit more character though to the bokeh. The Thypoch is just really smooth and has that glow to the overall image. Now looking at some of the detail here, both are nicely detailed at 1.4 surprisingly, but the Thypoch just beats it out a little bit more. Comparing these two images now at 2.8, let's just do some zooming in here. Both images have pretty good detail. I should mention as well, it says Leica M50 1.0. It's just the adapter that I'm using. It doesn't do a good job at changing the apertures, but this is at 2.8. And both images are pretty similar at 2.8 in terms of bokeh. It's really quite surprising just how well this Canon FD holds up, especially for its price. Like, it's incredible that it can trade punches with the FD when you go around this 2.8 range. f5.6 now on both the images. Both are really detailed. Background blur looks almost identical between both images. The FD has really smooth background blur. Looking at the last comparison here of this set, both are at f8, and I really don't see a huge difference between the two. It looks like both have relatively smooth bokeh. Both images are quite nicely detailed. I think I want to give the bokeh a bit more credit to the Thypoch, but I mean, it's nice on both. You really can't fault either. Sharpness in the image, really nice on both. Look at the detail on this FD. It's really impressive. There's really not even that much of a difference at f8 in detail between the two. Okay, on to the next image. You can see that the Thypoch really has a glow to it, with the Canon FD being quite warm. Both really nice though, good color reproduction on the two of the lenses here though. Sharpness, somewhat similar. Looks like there's a little more chromatic aberration on this FD though, as to be expected, although the Thypoch does have maybe even a little more in this region here. Looking at the two images now in a high contrast scene at 1.4, I'm pretty happy with this FD on the left. Unless you zoom in like this, you can really see that there's a ton of chromatic aberration compared to the Thypoch here, which I don't really see much at all of. But for video, the FD looks really nice and shines when shooting it into the sun. If you want character in your image, you can see here, however, that the bokeh on the FD has sort of almost like a guitar pick looking render to it compared to the Thypoch's more oval bokeh. Putting down both of the lenses to 2.8, you can see that the FD really starts to clean up and has a really modern sort of render at 2.8. Looks really nice and competes really nicely with this Thypoch lens. A lot of the chromatic aberration seems to be fading too once you get to 2.8, although the Thypoch has some as well. Here's another test at 1.4, And I will say that I'm pretty happy with how both lenses have rendered this image. Bokeh is somewhat similar, not a huge difference between the two. Both have a nice rendering. Oh, who do I give it to? I think maybe the Thypoch, but they're really comparable between the two. 2.8 now on both lenses. The sharpness on the FD looks really nice. Once you get down to that 2.8, this lens is just incredible. Comparing now both at f8, look at the detail in the center. Really nice lenses. Shooting now the Canon FD at 1.4, you can tell that it really creates this sort of dreamy look that would be really great when shooting video. This bench has a bit of an interesting look to it, whereas the writing is still sharp, but it is a little hazy. But overall, it's quite clear, and I think it makes for a pretty nice photo with quite a bit of vignetting in the corners. Now 2.8, you can see some of the vignetting is gone. Image has cleaned up quite a bit. It's really sharp now at that 2.8. Go to 5.6. Most of the vignetting is gone now at 5.6. This bench is nice and sharp. Go to f8 now. And this lens looks actually quite modern in its appearance. There's really no flaws at all to this. Even in this day, this is a really nice screaming sharp lens. Let's look now in the corners at f11. Everything is nicely in focus, detailed. Great lens. For the final photo comparison, we're going to be comparing this FD on the left with the Canon EF 51.8. This is one of the last models they ended up releasing. You can just see how much the coatings are affecting the results on the EF version compared to the older vintage coatings on the FD lens. Really suffers when shooting into this high contrast scene. Going on to 2.8 on both images now, and you can just see the FD lacks a ton of contrast compared to this 1.8. Now let's go to 5.6. And you can just see this FD lens is just filled with flares, and the flares will become a little more pronounced and it'll have a bit more of a purple hue as I stop the lens down more to f8 and f11. Now that we're at f8, you can see this FD, the purple flares on it are really quite pronounced. Honestly, in my eyes, it's quite distracting. If I were to be shooting in the sun like this, I would be picking this Canon 51.8 9 times out of 10, although that is a really nice sensor. There are some cool things about this FD lens that I certainly do appreciate. Here's the final photo comparison between this 51.8 and the Canon FD at f11. It really has a pretty noticeable flare here, which if you're shooting video work, I think could be nice. You can see as well here, there's a bit more of like a reddish flare as well with like a hexagonal bokeh in the image. Both images though look relatively sharp around this region. Not a ton of difference other than the FD having a lot less contrast in the scene, but both are relatively sharp. The EF's bokeh, it's not too bad.
Looks pretty hexagonal at f11. Both images have still quite a bit of chromatic aberration. Okay, back inside now. I've had a few days to go through the footage, and I'm really impressed with this FD lens. I think it did an incredible job against a modern Thypoch lens in the 1.4 Simera. It really impressed me, especially when I went to 2.8 and some of the higher apertures. 1.4, it's definitely not on the same level as the Thypoch, but this is a very good and sharp lens from 2.8 onward. On this channel, I really like to find solutions that help you spend less and do more. And I think this lens really lives within what I like to show. Content, please like and subscribe. Come back for more videos and content like this. Thank you to everyone that made it till the end of the video. I know this was a really long one, but there were so many comparison clips that I wanted to leave in just to paint a real clear, decisive picture if you should maybe buy a modern character lens or if a vintage lens like this 1.4 will be good enough for you. All right, everyone, I'm not going to take more of your time. I will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye.